Are you still working late tonight? I asked casually, leaning against the kitchen counter, watching Lisa as she rummaged through her purse. Her blonde hair fell in waves over her shoulders, framing a face that once lit up my world. Now, it just felt distant. Yeah, she replied, not even looking up, her voice flat. The project is crazy. It's going to be a late one again. I nodded, pretending to be engrossed in my phone. Lately, there had been too many late nights. Too many mysterious work dinners. Too many vague explanations. When's it due? I probed further, keeping my tone neutral. Next Friday. Why? She glanced at me quickly, then went back to rifling through her bag, pulling out her keys with a slight smile of triumph. Don't wait up, okay? I'll probably be home after midnight. Sure. You need me to pick up anything on the way back from work? I offered, slipping my phone into my pocket. No, I'm good. Thanks. She kissed me on the cheek but didn't meet my eyes. The door clicked shut behind her, and I stood there, staring at the empty space where she had just been. Something gnawed at me, a deep-rooted instinct that had started months ago, whispering that something was off. But I wasn't a jealous guy. At least, not until recently. I trusted her, or I wanted to. But tonight, that instinct was screaming. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick message to my buddy, Jake. Hey, you busy tonight? The response was immediate. Nope. What's up? Wanna meet me at Mike's pub in an hour? Sure. Everything okay? I hesitated. Was everything okay? I wasn't sure anymore. I'll explain when we meet. An hour later, I sat at the bar, nursing a beer when Jake arrived, sliding into the stool next to me. What's going on, man? He asked, signaling the bartender for a drink. I sighed, staring at the condensation on my glass. I think Lisa's cheating. Jake's eyes widened. Whoa. Seriously? What makes you think that? The late nights, the constant texting. She's distant. It's like she's here, but she's not here, you know? I took a deep breath. And tonight, something just felt off. I can't explain it. Jake leaned in closer. Have you asked her about it? Not directly. I don't want to seem paranoid. I shook my head. But if she's hiding something, I need to know. Jake was silent for a moment, swirling his drink. What are you gonna do? I hesitated. I was thinking of following her. Tonight. Just to see where she's actually going. Jake raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? No, but I can't sit around and wonder anymore. I need answers. Jake looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. Let's do it. I've got your back. We left the pub around 9:30, driving separate cars, just in case. I trailed Lisa from a safe distance as she left her office, my pulse racing with every turn. At first, I felt a twinge of guilt for what I was doing, but that disappeared when she didn't head home. Instead, she drove toward a more secluded part of town, a quiet neighborhood lined with upscale homes. Where is she going? I muttered to myself, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. Jake's voice crackled through my Bluetooth earpiece. You still on her? Yeah. She just pulled into a driveway. I parked a few houses down and watched as she got out of her car. My heart sank when another figure emerged from the house, a man who was definitely not one of her coworkers. He was tall, dark-haired, and had a smile that seemed all too familiar. Who the hell is that? Jake whispered in my ear. Good question, I replied, my stomach churning. They embraced. Not the kind of hug you'd give a friend or a colleague. It was intimate, lingering, like lovers reuniting. I felt my hands clench into fists as I watched, anger bubbling inside me. Dude. Jake's voice trailed off, sensing my fury. I'm going to find out who he is, I said coldly, already thinking of the next steps. This wasn't just about confronting Lisa anymore. I needed to know who this guy was. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. We waited for what felt like hours, but it was only 30 minutes. When the lights in the house finally flicked off, I had my answer. Lisa wasn't working late. She was spending her nights in someone else's arms. And that someone was going to pay for it. I drove back home in silence, my mind racing with anger and betrayal. Jake followed behind, occasionally sending me messages checking if I was okay, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. My world had just collapsed, and there was only one thing on my mind now: revenge. By the time I got home, I had a plan forming. If Lisa was going to tear our marriage apart, then I would return the favor. But not just to her. To him too. After all, he had a wife. And she deserved to know just how unfaithful her husband was. The following day, I took a sick day from work and began my search. "Dude, you're really gonna do this?" Jake's voice buzzed in my ear as I parked my car outside a quiet suburban cafe. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard, 11:45 a.m. She'd be here soon. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins as my plan moved forward. "I have too, Jake. You saw what I saw. That guy's married too, and his wife needs to know what's happening behind her back," I responded, gripping my phone tighter. The weight of the betrayal still hung over me like a storm cloud, but now, it wasn't just anger. It was determination. "I get it, man, but this is some heavy stuff. Just make sure you don't end up regretting any of this." "I won't regret it," I muttered. "Not after what they've done." I had done my homework. It hadn't taken long to dig into the guy's life. His name was Brian Evans, and he lived just a few miles away in a well-kept neighborhood with his wife, Megan. She worked part-time at a local gallery. From what I could gather online, they had been married for almost 7 years and had a young daughter. Knowing that, the idea of confronting Megan felt almost cruel. But then, I reminded myself, she deserved to know, just like I did. If Brian was sneaking around with my wife, he was breaking their marriage vows just like Lisa was breaking ours. My stomach churned as I scrolled through Brian's Facebook photos. Happy family pictures, vacations, Christmas mornings with their little girl unwrapping presents. It was the kind of life I used to think Lisa and I would have. But now, everything had changed. I closed the app as I saw her. Megan. She was walking toward the cafe, completely unaware of the storm she was about to walk into. Dressed in casual jeans and a light jacket, she looked like any normal wife and mom going about her day. I almost hesitated, but then I remembered what I'd seen the night before. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about giving someone else the truth that had been stolen from me. I got out of the car, feeling the crisp autumn air on my face, and walked into the cafe just as she sat down. I spotted her immediately, sipping on her coffee, her phone resting on the table. I approached her slowly, my mind racing with how to start this conversation. "Excuse me," I said, standing in front of her table. She looked up, confused, her eyes searching my face for recognition. "Yes? I'm sorry to bother you," I started, feeling a knot form in my throat. "Are you Megan Evans?" She nodded, still confused. "I am. Do we know each other?" I sat down across from her, my heart pounding in my chest. "No, we don't. But I think we need to talk." Her eyebrows furrowed. "Okay. About what?" I took a deep breath. "About your husband. Brian." At that, her face changed. It was subtle, but I could see the worry creep into her eyes. "What about Brian?" she asked, her voice a little sharper now, more guarded. I leaned in, keeping my voice low. I don't know how to say this. But I'm pretty sure Brian is having an affair." Her expression froze. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. She stared at me, not blinking, as if her brain was trying to catch up to the words I had just said. "What? No. Brian would never." "I'm sorry," I interrupted softly, "but he is. With my wife." Her breath caught. "Your wife? Who is your wife?" "Lisa. Lisa Matthews." Megan blinked, her mouth opening slightly in shock. "Lisa? Wait, the blonde? They work together, right?" "Yeah," I said, the word bitter on my tongue. "They work together. And apparently, they've been doing a lot more than that." Her face paled, and I watched as she struggled to process what I was saying. The disbelief turned to confusion, then anger, and finally, the kind of realization that tears at your soul. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "This can't be true. Brian wouldn't. We have a family. He wouldn't do this." I felt a pang of guilt watching her crumble like that, but I couldn't stop now. I didn't want to believe it either. But I followed Lisa last night. I saw them together at a house. And it wasn't the first time. I'm so sorry, Megan. For a few moments, she sat in silence, her hands trembling as she gripped her coffee cup. I could see her world unraveling, just like mine had. Then, slowly, she looked up at me, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you sure? Is there any chance you're mistaken? I pulled out my phone, the images I'd taken from the night before ready to show her. I'm not mistaken. I took these last night. I handed the phone to her, watching as she scrolled through the pictures. Each one seemed to drain more color from her face. When she finally set the phone down, her hands were shaking, and tears were welling up in her eyes. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice cracking. Why would he do this? We have a life. We have a daughter. I swallowed hard. I don't know, Megan. But I thought you deserved to know. Just like I deserved to know what my wife was doing. She wiped at her eyes quickly, trying to hold herself together. Thank you for telling me. I don't know what to do. I nodded. I'm sorry. I wish I didn't have to tell you, but I couldn't just let you live in the dark. She sat back in her chair, staring blankly at the wall. What are you going to do? She finally asked. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I'm not going to sit back and let them get away with this. They tore our lives apart, and they're going to face the consequences. Megan nodded slowly, her lips tightening into a thin line. Yeah. They are. We sat there in silence for a few moments, both of us processing the weight of the betrayal. Finally, Megan looked up at me, her face set with a new determination. We're not the only ones who should be suffering because of their choices. If they thought they could destroy our lives and walk away from it, they're wrong. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. What are you thinking? A fire ignited in her eyes. I think it's time we turned the tables on them. By the time we left the cafe, we had a plan. A plan that would ensure Brian and Lisa face the full consequences of their lies. I can't believe we're doing this, Megan whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling of the wind as we stood outside the office building where both Lisa and Brian worked. She adjusted her scarf, her face pale but determined. I never thought I'd be here. Neither did I replied, my gaze locked on the front entrance. But they put us here. It's time they deal with what they've done. The plan we had hatched in the cafe 2 days ago had been simple, but effective. Confronting them in private had crossed our minds, but we both wanted something more, a public reckoning, where they couldn't hide behind lies or excuses. We wanted to see their reactions, see them squirm when everything came crashing down around them. We wanted justice. And today, we were going to get it. Megan checked her phone again, glancing at the time. Lisa's lunch break is in about 5 minutes. Brian's usually in the break room by then. Are you sure you're ready? I've never been more ready in my life, I said, my jaw tightening. Every fiber of my being had been consumed by this moment, by the thought of finally confronting the people who had shattered my world. Megan nodded and slipped her phone back into her bag. Okay. Let's do this. We walked into the building, the fluorescent lights humming overhead as we made our way to the break room. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the anticipation building with each step. Megan kept her head held high, her jaw clenched, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. This wasn't easy for either of us, but it had to be done. As we approached the break room, I caught sight of Lisa's blonde hair. She was sitting at a small table with Brian, laughing about something, completely oblivious to the storm about to hit them. The sight of them sitting there, so casual, so comfortable, sent a wave of rage through me. How could they act like everything was fine? Like they weren't destroying our lives behind closed doors? Megan stopped at the doorway, her face hardening as she saw her husband. Brian, who had always seemed like such a stand-up guy, now looked like nothing more than a fraud in her eyes. Ready? She whispered to me, though her eyes never left him. I nodded. Let's end this. We stepped into the room, and it didn't take long for them to notice us. Lisa was the first to look up, her smile freezing on her face the moment she saw me. John? What are you doing here? Her voice faltered, betraying the shock she was trying to hide. Brian looked equally stunned, his eyes darting from Megan to me, realizing immediately that this wasn't some friendly visit. I think you know why we're here, I said coldly, locking eyes with Lisa. Or at least you should. The color drained from her face, and she glanced nervously at Brian, as if searching for some kind of escape. But there was none. "Brian," Megan said, her voice low but filled with a quiet fury, "why don't you explain to me why you've been lying to me for months?" Brian blinked, his face a mask of confusion. "Lying? Megan, I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, really?" Megan snapped, her voice rising. "Then maybe you can explain why you've been sneaking around with her." She pointed at Lisa, her eyes blazing, while pretending to be a devoted husband and father. "Because I've got pictures that say otherwise." Lisa's eyes widened in panic, and Brian looked like he'd been slapped. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "Megan, this isn't what you think," Brian stammered, but she cut him off. "Don't you dare insult my intelligence, Brian," Megan spat, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "I've seen the photos. I've seen the messages. You've been lying to me, to our daughter, to everyone." Lisa stood up, her chair scraping against the floor, her hands shaking. "John, I can explain." "No," I interrupted, my voice cold and steady. "There's nothing to explain. I followed you. I saw everything. And now, you're going to face the consequences of what you've done." For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of the confrontation settling heavily in the air. Neither Lisa nor Brian knew what to say. They were caught, exposed, and all they could do was stand there, speechless. "You think you can just ruin people's lives and get away with it?" Megan continued, her voice shaking with emotion. "You think you can tear apart our family and then pretend nothing happened? Well, guess what, Brian? I'm done. We're done." Brian reached out, desperation in his eyes. "Megan, please. It wasn't like that. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" Megan laughed bitterly. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk from the store. What you did, what you've been doing, isn't a mistake. It's a choice. A choice to betray me, to betray our daughter." Lisa stepped forward, her face flushed with panic. "John, please, I never wanted to hurt you. It just happened. Don't," I cut her off, my voice icy. "Don't stand there and try to justify what you did. You made a choice, Lisa. You both did. And now, you're going to have to live with the consequences." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the wall clock. Lisa's eyes were filled with tears, her hands shaking as she realized how far things had spiraled out of her control. Brian stood frozen, his face pale as Megan glared at him, her eyes filled with hurt and rage. Finally, Megan broke the silence. "You're going to hear from my lawyer," she said, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm filing for divorce. And I'm going to make sure our daughter knows exactly who you are." Brian's face crumbled, his shoulders sagging under the weight of her words. "Megan, please." "No," she snapped. "You don't get to plead with me. You don't get to pretend you're the victim here." Lisa looked at me, her eyes pleading. "John, please don't do this. We can fix this." I shook my head, my heart hardening against the pain in her voice. "There's nothing left to fix, Lisa. You destroyed everything. I'm done." With that, I turned on my heel, Megan following closely behind me. We left them standing there, their perfect little lives shattered around them, knowing that they would now have to face the wreckage they had created. As we walked out into the cool afternoon air, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. The pain was still there, but so was a sense of closure. I didn't know what the future held for me or for Megan, but at least we weren't trapped in the dark anymore. For the first time in months, I felt free. Later that day, Megan and I sat in a quiet diner, sipping coffee as the sun began to set. The confrontation had taken its toll, and we were both emotionally drained, but there was also a sense of victory between us. "Do you think they'll stay together?" Megan asked, staring down at her cup. I shrugged. "I don't know. But after what we did today, I doubt it." She nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I guess it doesn't really matter, does it?" "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the world pass by outside the diner windows. The sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow across the street. "Thanks," Megan finally said, breaking the silence. "For helping me get through this. I don't know if I could have done it alone. I smiled softly. You didn't have to. We both got through it. And now, we move on. She nodded, a new sense of determination in her eyes. Yeah. Now, we move on. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.